Great. So folks, so I'm going to speak to you today about value creation in pharma. It was a bit of a daunting topic, and so the way that I came at it is that it's thinking it from a kind of shareholder perspective, and as a person who has had their 17-year career primarily in marketing and pharma, my focus has been on sort of thinking about the allocation of promotion spend, and I wanted to share with you today some of the things that I've learned and some of the things that have probably been most startling over my career so far in terms of guiding a little bit of our decision making. So I've called this "First Do No Harm." So the notion is that you have some value within a product, and one of the first imperatives should be to try not to waste it. And so it's not a trivial idea, because according to IMS, and the most recent data that I could get for free is this chart here, which is from 2012, that showed that in 2012 there was about $95 billion spent globally on promotion spending in the pharmaceutical industry, and somewhat counterintuitively, that's actually increasing. It was up 7% versus 2007. And when you think about the sort of environment that we've been in with all this M&A and sort of the expected synergies from that activity, or kind of the loss of exclusivities and the patent cliffs, you wouldn't think that would be increasing, but it is. And so the best number that I've seen in Canada is we spend about $1 billion on promotional spend in Canada. And again, things are increasing. The numbers of reps have increased, and it's all on an increasing trend. And if you buy into this notion that what somebody famous once said, that about half of their spending on promotion is wasted, they just don't know which half. So if you buy into that idea, there's probably about $45 to $50 billion of value globally in this equation. And if we can only figure out kind of which 50 that is, we can create and save a lot of value. So one of my observations coming into this industry 17 years ago is that, unlike the way that we test and make decisions about drugs, a lot of the decisions that we make around promotion spending have a tendency to be driven by anecdote. And so I think that if we were to make the decisions that if we were to test our promotional ideas the same way that we test our drugs, we might make some very different decisions. And so so that's been sort of kind of one of my passions in my work to date, and I want to show you some of my findings that have been probably the most kind of startling, counterintuitive, and frustrating as a marketer, but have have had a real impact on the way that I think about things. So this is our actual data from Paladin over the years. These are kind of individual cases, but what I'm showing you has been pretty representative over the years. I've also taken away the names to protect the innocent. But so when we actually kind of measure closely sort of our marketing activities, we find some very counterintuitive things. And so one of the general intuitions within the pharma industry is that nothing happens until you have a sales rep that visits a doctor. There's no trial that nobody's going to make any kind of prescription unless a sales rep goes in and visits a doctor and makes a call. And so this is data. So this is one of the things that we measure pretty closely. And so this is a good example of what we often see. And this is an example from a launch across the first 12 months of the launch. You can see that this is a measure of the cumulative numbers of doctors that wrote a prescription for this brand launch first time ever. So first time ever tried. So this is a representation of somebody actually having experience prescribing our product. And we were pretty satisfied with this launch. You can see that kind of within the first 12 months, we got up to about 6,000 prescribers. Those prescribers represented about 80% of the market value in the market. So we were pretty happy with that. The part that was astounding is that about 25% of those doctors had been visited by a rep before they wrote their first prescription. So conversely, about 75% had not been visited by a rep, right? So when I show this to our sales team, they get really cranky at me. But so that was one important finding. Another kind of key hypothesis that a lot of us hold is that frequency makes a big difference in terms of market share. And so again, that's a testable hypothesis and something that we have looked at pretty closely. So this is a good example of measuring share amongst doctors who have first prescribed the product. So this is people that have already tried once. What happens to their prescribing habits over time after their first prescription? And what we typically find is that the market share kind of peaks pretty quickly. In this case, kind of 3 to 4 months after that first prescription. And if you have a product that is kind of delivering on its promise, that prescription level will stay flat, kind of like what you're seeing here. What was interesting is when you start to segment that out by call volume, we find, again, some very counterintuitive and sometimes frustrating things. And so here, where we've split it out by doctors that were called on very heavily, doctors that are called on in a kind of medium level of frequency, doctors that were not called on at all, you don't see any real separation amongst these lines. And so you would think that if the theory held true, that doctors that were being called on more frequently, that you'd see a higher market share. So that's a tough conclusion. So tough that we try and look at it several different ways. And so looking at it a different way, and this is again a different brand from a different time, a different launch. Regardless of the number of times that somebody was called on by a sales rep, whether it was 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, we looked at what was the likelihood of that prescriber seeing a change in their prescriptions in the last 3 months. And here, again, what you're seeing about an equal propensity to see an increase in prescription as a decrease in prescriptions. And so again, another tough and challenging finding. And one of the things that kind of helped kind of tie this together for me was a few years ago, IMS started to present kind of new data. So for the first time, we started to get access to true new patient data. So for the first time, we started to be able to access patient-level databases through insurance providers and really be able to isolate kind of what is our share amongst those cases where a doctor is looking at a brand new patient and making a discriminating decision to say, what drug am I going to put you on? And IMS did a really interesting study, which I never got a copy of, but I sort of recreated it from memory here in this slide. So this is kind of a cartoon. But they looked back at over 100 launches in the United States and another 100 launches in Canada, and they looked at the relationship between total prescription share, new prescription share, and new patient share. And so I think any marketer will be able to tell you that new prescription share is a leading indicator of what your total prescription share will be, and that new patient share should also be a leading indicator of what your total share will eventually be. And we also know that generally in the industry, it takes about kind of 4 or 5 years for you to see your total prescription share peak. So that wasn't a surprising finding. It wasn't a surprising finding to see that your new prescription share kind of leads that, but is pretty much on the same trajectory. But what this study found is that new patient share peaks very rapidly and then goes flat very early on in the launch. And the part that was most stunning is the conclusion was that new patient share would peak about 13 weeks post-launch, so about 4 months post-13, they found 13 weeks in the United States and about 26 weeks in Canada. So 4 to 6 months post-launch, you're seeing a peak in terms of new patient share. And what that indicates is that doctors are receiving information about new product launches. They're pretty smart people. They're making their decisions about what the benefits of that product relative to the other alternatives, and they're figuring out pretty quickly about where that product slots in their prescribing habits. And what was particularly interesting is when this was analyzed to look at sort of differences in promotion level, kind of high levels of promotion, low levels of promotion, there was very little that influenced this curve once it had already kind of inflected. The only thing that really had a demonstrable impact was, in fact, direct-to-consumer advertising, and that's something that's only really available in the United States. So really kind of interesting and influential, and I got 20 seconds to kind of bring this home. So what do you draw from this? How do you use this to create value? And so I think that the first thing is to recognize, look, promotion strategy is critically important to your success, but what you need to think about is, what is the magnitude of promotion spend that's required to be successful in a new product launch? And what is the degree of time over which you think that you need to spend that? Oh, there's the music. And so I would just offer that maybe doctors get things more quickly than thought, and that you should be that we should all be very rigorous in sort of examining how this works. So that's my message. Thank you.